Why businesses in Venezuela are not catered towards internationals. Today we discuss.
Welcome to Venezuela Insider, the only place in Venezuela for expats, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, investors, travelers, and related internationals. For more information, venezuelainsider.com.
Today we are going to talk about why businesses in Venezuela are not catered towards internationals, as you see in many parts of Latin America. For instance, if you have visited Mexico, let's say, places like Cancun, Playa del Carmen, Mexico City itself, the Cape, and some handful of other destinations in Mexico. You can throw Puerto Vallarta and also Guadalajara and places like that. And usually, let's say if you want to check in on a hotel, on a fancy hotel, or a restaurant, or even a real estate service, you want to see they have an English website, and they also they have people who speak English very fluently. In some cases, even Western natives that are living in Mexico, and they have a great customer service that is catered towards internationals, especially U.S. citizens. And you can say the same thing on a lesser degree in places like Panama, also Colombia, a handful of places in Colombia like Cartagena, Bogota, of course, and now Medellin, that is very popular. Of course, I know that. And maybe some Brazilian hubs like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. And of course, many, let's say, less developed countries outside of Latin America, some places in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. And let's say you want to visit a fancy restaurant, a resort, a restaurant, get real estate, or maybe do some other business over there. And they have the structure in order to get the proper customer service for internationals, especially for US and Canadian citizens. Now, if you have some experience in Venezuela, you know that in Venezuela is not quite the case. Because unlike these places, like I mentioned, Mexico, Colombia, Panama, a handful of their clients, a very important share of their clients, and in some cases, most of their clients are internationals, Western internationals, and even in some cases, they fully attend U.S. citizens, and those are their clients. However, in Venezuela, it's not going to be the case. And actually, Venezuela Insider is a rare exception on this rule, is that most businesses here in Venezuela are catered not to internationals, but to the rich Venezuelans, the wealthy Venezuelans that actually are the best clients. And the marketing and the business culture and also let's say, the marketing and sales process is different for them. And there are several reasons for that. The first one is that Venezuela doesn't receive a lot of international tourists, as much, nothing compared to, let's say, Mexico or Panama and right now Colombia. So business in Venezuela don't count with the international. They count is with the high-end wealthy Venezuelan citizen. Regardless of how they became wealthy, that's a discussion for another day. But yet again, these clients usually, they are hard to deal with, the rich Venezuelan clients. However, usually pay pretty well, because you have to remember that most Venezuelans are impoverished. We have just a handful or a low percentage of middle-class Venezuelans that usually don't require these high-end services, because most of their expenses goes towards groceries, paying the tuition, the high school tuition for their kids, or so on, schooling, and a handful of, let's say, luxuries like eating out once in a while and so on. So they have to depend, their client base is most of the time rich Venezuelans. We discussed how they got wealthy, but that's a discussion for another day yet again. And the only way that can sustain their business is having a portfolio of clients that are wealthy, just a handful of clients, in order to make ends meet And this goes for high-end restaurants, also for touristic services, fancy hotels, and of course real estate. I have to mention real estate because most of the time dealing with international clients is difficult for them. Also, we have to mention that unlike most Latin American countries, Venezuela, US and Canadian citizens require a tourist visa in order to visit the country, unless they have a second passport that is a visa-free passport in order to visit Venezuela. Getting a visa for visiting Venezuela is quite a dreadful process. My clients already know that. And so you don't count with these North American clients. And when they have international clients, usually come from Western Europe or countries like China, also Middle Eastern countries, Russians lately, maybe diplomatic clients, but usually they visit is Caracas, so outside of Caracas, in a handful of locations like maybe Canaima or Roques, you're not going to see that much wealthy international clients. Also, I have to say that most of the international visitors that we have in Venezuela come from Western Europe and also in other parts of Latin America, I have to say. And usually the most of the international visitors, they are not wealthy. They are usually middle or low middle class. And usually they are very frugal. And they don't, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, they don't make the expenses on the high-end experiences or providers of the high-end experience. You also have to remember that since Venezuela has been impoverished, something that you consider a middle-class experience, actually in Venezuela is a high-class experience because just a handful of people have the purchasing power in order to access those services. That's why the competition in Venezuela regarding businesses, the traditional businesses, are for wealthy people, regardless if they are Venezuelan or not, because you cannot sustain a business in Venezuela that caters for middle-class people. It has to go to the high-class people or the lower end, talking cheap facilities, cheap experiences that is very hard to sustain just for most of Venezuelans because most of them have been impoverished. And it's a sad situation, but it is what it is. So the only way that is profitable in most cases is to just improve the conditions for your business. Let's say you used to have a middle-class business, and the only way to sustain consistently this business is to take it up a notch or two and cater for high-end services like fancy dining, fancy restaurants, fancy touristic services, and so on and so on. The other issue I have to mention is, like I said before, that many internationals that come to Venezuela, they don't, like I said, they are lower middle class, most cases, not all. And so they are not accustomed to paying the services here that are, pricey, like going to a fancy nightclub or a fancy restaurant or a fancy hotel, stuff like that, let alone real estate prices. And usually the local businesses, they got frustrated and they have to create a special structure in order to market and sell towards them. And usually they are deemed, some cases, are cheap or unsophisticated. They cannot afford those services and it represents an extra burden in order to deal with them. So instead of that, it's way easy for most businesses in Venezuela to just offer services for the wealthy Venezuelans because, of course, they pay better and it's less a hassle, for instance, dealing with the language barrier or the culture barrier and so on and so on. So they prefer to just straight up sell and market towards the high end instead of the international. And lastly, I want to tell, for instance, this story. On the recent years, we have received a bunch of Russian tourists or workers, as you want to call it. We have seen a bunch of Russian people here, and mostly males. Usually, they used to be people, they are doing something with the government, stuff like that, or small investors, something like that. But lately, we have receiving tourists mostly on Margarita Island, Russian tourists, and these people, Venezuela became attractive for international visiting because they have the sanctions for the war. So the Russian people, Russian citizens, they can only travel to a handful of countries like Turkey, places like that. And well, Venezuela became attractive for them. And they have these touristic packages they can purchase on their home country, in Russia, of course. And a handful of them are usually visiting Margarita Island. What happens is these people usually are, blue-collar workers from Russia, so they don't have a significant purchasing power. They purchase their ticket, their packages. They stay on the hotel and so on, and they don't spend on the local economy. This is the reports that I'm getting from Margarita Island, by the way. This is not my words. And usually they are unsophisticated, and the business people that I know in Margarita Island, they're telling me that it's not worth their while to cater towards them. They have a different language, a different culture. They are deemed as cheap as well, so it's just easier to market their service in Margarita Island for instance, wealthy people from Caracas. They visit a lot the island, so it's cheaper, and also you have a bigger base of wealthy clients from Caracas that middle-class clients from Russia. So that's one of the reasons, and this is just, story time that I wanted to finish the video. If you have a business in Venezuela, please leave your comments below. If you have visited Venezuela and you're from abroad, please also leave it on the comments below.
Thank you for watching Venezuela Insider. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on social media. If you want to work with us, VenezuelaInsider.com. Thanks again, and have a nice day.